Welcome. So let's see where we're going to start here. All right, a little bit of an overview of the training. I think I packed more in today than we can actually get done, but we'll give it our best shot. And we're going to be talking about the treatment in general, giving you an overview of what goes into it. Then we're going to be moving into how you structure the sessions and the primary treatment ingredients. But the main thing that we're going to be covering this morning is how you conceptualize cases from the cognitive behavioral perspective and how you conceptualize cases specifically for depression. The reason that that's important when you're using an evidence-based intervention is because research indicates that if you look at the effectiveness of an evidence-based intervention and the individuals who are implementing it have an understanding of how to conceptualize cases from the perspective of the individual who wrote the treatment, they're more effective and the outcomes with the kids they work with are better if they can conceptualize the cases and they really have a good understanding of kind of like the theory that went into the development of that treatment manual. So we're going to spend a little bit more time on case conceptualization than you might have expected for an evidence-based intervention. We'll be taking a break and then we'll move into the kind of psychoeducation part of the treatment, which is fairly extensive. And I think one of the things that you're going to find about the action treatment relative to other treatments for depression or anxiety or other disorders is we do a lot of setting the kids up for the intervention pieces that follow. So there's a lot of preparing the kids and building in their heads kind of like schema that help them to apply the treatment components later on. Okay, so like when we're going to be talking towards the end of the day about the cognitive interventions, we spend a lot of time, literally from the beginning of treatment until the cognitive interventions are introduced, on establishing a rationale within the kids' heads for using the cognitive interventions. So we kind of build this base for each of the treatment components before they're introduced. Then we're going to break for lunch, come back, and we're going to move into the coping skills training. One of the things that I found when I was developing the intervention was that I'd read in the literature, you need to teach the kids coping skills, right? And then I'd look at the treatment materials and everyone would say, talk coping skills. Well, nobody told you what are the coping skills that you teach kids. So what we did was we did a study where we had teachers identify especially resilient kids. And then we put the kids into focus groups and we asked them to tell us what skills they use when they're feeling down, when they're feeling anxious, when they're feeling angry, and when they're feeling hyper. And what emerged was a common set of 5 broad strategies for managing emotions. So we'll be talking about those 5 broad strategies. That's really important in the treatment of depression because what we're going to do is we're going to use those coping skills and emotion regulation strategies to get the kids behaviorally activated. And that's probably the primary treatment component of an intervention for depression. So we'll be talking about the coping skills, how you implement the coping skills in session, how you get the kids to use it, how you make it fun for the kids. Then we'll be taking a break, coming back, and talking about problem-solving training. Now, some of the literature suggested that problem-solving training was the primary ingredient that leads to improvement in the kids that are depressed. Our own research suggests that's not the case, that it's more of the behavioral activation rather than the problem solving. So nevertheless, problem solving is a really important part of the action treatment. It's an important part of the treatment of any disorder from the cognitive behavioral perspective. And we'll move into then how you introduce cognitive restructuring to the kids. So hopefully we'll be able to squeeze all of that in today. If we're effective at getting all of that in, then tomorrow we'll move into cognitive restructuring and we'll spend the whole morning on it. And then we'll go into the parent training component. This is the first time I've been able to spend half a day on the cognitive restructuring. Usually I only get an hour or so, and you basically just get to give people an overview of what cognitive restructuring is, but you don't really get to teach them anything about it and how to do it. So I'm looking forward to having some time to actually do that. It's probably the most complex of the treatment strategies that we're going to be talking about, and while we have a half a day to talk about it, you'll get a sense of how to use it, but it's one of those things that takes a long time to really master and get good at. So that's kind of the overview for the 2 days, and so today let's get started and see how far we can get. Oops, wrong direction. Okay, a little bit about me. Bill mentioned a number of things. Right now, I mentioned to Bill that I started a treatment center in Austin along with one of the child and adolescent psychiatrists, Bill Strusan, and we created a collaborative between Dell Children's Medical Center and the University of Texas. We created a training center and outpatient treatment program, and now we're into the hospital and we're working in the ED, working with oncology, we're working with epilepsy, concussion program. We're just spreading through the hospital, and it's really turned into something that's really pretty cool. It's a lot of fun. We're up to 900, we're having our 3rd birthday, and we're up to 900 patient visits a month now. And I see between 10 and 18 patients a week. The action treatment, I've actually been working on it for a really long time. I started out with my interest in treatment of ADHD, and I was at the University of Wisconsin. Phil Kendall was at Minnesota, so I learned a lot about Phil's program, and I was heading down the path towards doing my dissertation on a variant of Phil's treatment for impulsive kids, and my advisor said, "Hey, Kevin, why don't you do something on depression?" So I wrote my proposal and did a study way back in 1986 that's published in 87, which was one of the first group interventions for depression in children. It was one of the first studies on the treatment of depression in children. So since then, I've been working on this intervention program, and it's actually evolved quite a bit over time. Another fun thing that I was involved in, really exciting and a great opportunity, was I've worked with Peter Jensen. After the 9/11 attacks, he was at Columbia University and called a group of people from around the country and asked us to develop intervention programs for the kids that were the child victims of the 9/11 attacks. And so Wendy Silverman from here was involved in that. Wendy, along with Tom Ollendick, wrote the anxiety disorders intervention. And so I wrote the depression intervention and got to sit in with Wendy and Tom as they were developing the anxiety disorders program. It was a really interesting project, and we ended up teaching the therapists in New York City and then across New York State in the use of that intervention. And then we did the same thing after Katrina. I have 3 children now. They're grown, and they actually, it's kind of surprising how old they are now. I get kind of blown away by it. And 3 stepchildren and 1 grandchild who's just turned 1 year old today. And things that I like to do, we're really lucky in where we live in Austin. You think of Austin, Texas, and when I first thought about moving there, I thought of like, tumbleweeds rolling across the road and all that kind of thing. And it turns out Austin's not like that. It's a really pretty green city. It's rolling hills, and there are 5 lakes within the city. And we live out in Georgetown, just north of Austin, and we have a river that cuts through our backyard. It was dammed on one end, so there was a small lake, and I had a dock where I could go bass fishing in the evening when I got home from work. And we had a huge flood, took out the dam, and so now we have about that much water in the river, but they're repairing it. And then we have a spring-fed creek that cuts through the side of the property. And I've been working on building a natural kind of pond swimming pool area, and we're just about finished with it. And then the spring pumps out 7,000 gallons an hour of pure spring water, so it's nice and cool year round. So I do a lot of work on kind of landscaping and developing that and turning that into kind of the centerpiece of the house. And when I was first out of high school, one of my sister's friends had a old Jaguar XKE, and I bought it for practically nothing and still have it, and over the years restored it, and then showed it, and my youngest son worked with me on it. It was really pretty cool. We'd go across the country showing it, and he was little at the time. He had these little hands that could get into places and polish it up and clean it up, and so we actually won first in nation with that car, so still have it, and it was in storage, now bringing it out of storage and working on getting it going again. And have a couple other cars that I like to work on and drive and fool around with. And then something I got into a number of years ago with my oldest son when he was 16 years old. He was a competitive swimmer, and he took a little time off from swimming. He got burned out. He'd been swimming from 8 to about 16 at a real high level where he was training twice a day for probably about a total of 4 hours a day. He got burned out, and so he's looking for something to do, and he started training with a professional boxer in Austin who became a world champ. And so I'd take him to the training and watch him work out, and then they started saying, "Oh, come on, you can do it, you're not that old." And so they ended up talking me into it, and I really had a lot of fun doing it and got to know the fighters and watched their careers as they developed, and became really good friends with a number of them. And one of them became a 2-time world champ, and another one became a 4-time world champ. So it was really fun to get to know them and work out with them. And so I would spend about 2.5 hours, 3 days a week working out with those guys, and that's been a lot of fun. So I thought we'd take a few minutes to just get to know who you all are and what you do. So I guess we'll go ahead and start with you.
Okay. My name is Joanna Watson. I'm in private practice, and I'm also a consultant for the Alliance for LGBTQ Youth. So I've been running groups in Miami public high schools for about 6 years.
Great. So when you decided to attend the training, what were you hoping that you would end up kind of getting out of it?
Well, I've been supervised from a cognitive behavioral therapist in New York, Jenna Klosko. And I just really like the idea. A lot of the youth I work with are depressed.
Uh-huh.
And we use, through the Children's Trust, we're funded to do some of our work in the schools. And it's just, I'm wondering how we can have a greater impact on like we measure their coping skills, but as you said, no one's really teaching us
Uh-huh.
to directly impact their coping skills.
What do you use to measure coping skills?
Reaction to daily events.
So it's something that, is that an actual measure, or is that something that you kind of informally assess?
It's an
Actual measure. I haven't seen that one.
I can bring a copy of it tomorrow.
Oh, that'd be great, thanks. Okay. I think you'll get a pretty good sense of, I'm really confident you're going to get a good sense of what we're going to do for coping skills and how they can be applied to the high school students. I think that this intervention, while I designed it for kids that are like 8 to 14 years old, I think it's more effective with teenagers. I think they really get it. The cognitive restructuring part is really powerful with the teenagers. So I think you'll be able to very easily adapt what we're talking about for the high schoolers. Yeah. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Belinda Phillips. I work with Miami-Dade Parks and Recreation. I'm a recreation therapist. I run the after-school program, out-of-school program, because we do summer camps, winter camps for kids with disabilities. So I work with a lot of kids with autism, Down syndrome. Some of them are nonverbal, but they're very smart, smarter than you sometimes. But and I came because there are a couple kids on depression, and speaking with the parents, they're lost. They put them on medication. I mean, we're doing fun activities and trying to, get the kid, but it's like coping skills for the kids.
Mm-hmm.
How can I help the kids? Because they have a hard time communicating.
Right.
And even give the information to the parents. So, and there are just one or two coming through now that are, and the behaviors are changing, and I know it's because of some of the expression. But it's, I came because it jumped out at me, and it's like, come and learn, and then go back and take it back there.
Great. You're posing probably the $1 million question. No, now today it'd be more like the $10 million question, because it's how do you apply evidence-based interventions to kids who have autism. And I've been trying to figure that out, and I've contacted people around the country. And people say, well, we're doing this, but we really don't know if it works or not. And I know that there are a few studies that are going on right now where they're applying CBT for internalizing disorders in kids that have autism. But I've talked to some of those people that are doing it, and they say essentially they're not sure what they're doing or what's going to work or not. But I think that we'll be able to talk about like the coping and problem solving components and how you can apply those with kids who have disabilities. And so I hope you'll just ask questions and we can talk it through.
I also work with kids who don't have cognitive disabilities, who have physical disabilities.
Okay.
I'm a coach.
Oh, great.
I don't believe in time-of-day training for kids.
Uh-huh.
Of any age until you get to Michael Phelps. Your son stopped when he could become Michael Phelps. But it's fun. That's frowned upon because, but
Yeah, burnout.
but people learn that often. So I have kids as well who have physical disabilities, no cognitive disability. And so it will apply all over, not just,
Great.
through.
Okay.
So whatever information, I try and apply how I can.
Great. Well, as you're thinking it through, feel free to ask questions and let's talk, and we can hopefully as a group come up with some ideas for how to apply it. So I think it's really, it's a really important area that you're working in.
Thanks.
Maria Zayas-Bazan, I'm a licensed psychologist, and I'm also Vice President of Behavioral Health at Miami Beach Community Health Center here with my colleague. And basically we were attracted to this because being in community health, we see a whole variety of disorders, children presenting with the full spectrum, and see the frustration of the parents in trying to help their children and how to make certain decisions and structure their child's day and things like that. And sometimes we get a lot of resistance from the parents, so we're looking for really kind of different ways and ways to expand our toolbox to better help our population.
Great. So one of the nice things, I think, is that working in an outpatient mental health center, I get the complex cases that you have. You know, one of the things that I found when I first started doing trainings on the evidence-based interventions for depression was that the people from the community would say, well, we never get a kid who's just depressed. They have all these other things going on, so how do you make it work for them? It would never work for them. So that was probably the most common statement, especially like when we first started the trainings in New York City, that therapists would say, that'll never work for our kids. Our kids are way more complex than that. And it's true, they're really complex cases, and it's rare that they just have a depressive disorder. They have so much kind of comorbidity and other life things going on. But I think with the clinical work that I do, I see those kids on a daily basis. So we can talk about how you take this intervention and adapt it for the population that you have. And we can talk about, like, if the kids present with PTSD, for example, along with depression, what do you do? And I think I have a pretty good idea of what you do in those cases. So again, please feel free to ask questions as we go along, and we can talk about how to adapt the intervention for the multi-disordered kids.
Hey, my name is Felicita Ortiz, and I'm pretty much to describe what we do.
Okay, thanks. Now we're moving to the grad student section.
So I'll start, I guess. My name is Gabby Rodriguez, and I'm a second-year student here in the clinical program, and I work with Dan Wagner. And I guess why I'm here is because I usually work with kids with externalizing problems, young kids, and I wanted to kind of expand my knowledge a little bit into other areas of childhood problems.
Great.
And my name is Diana Lucianez, and I also work with Dan Wagner, and I'm a first-year grad student here in the clinical program. And kind of similar to what Gabby said, I just want to expand and kind of learn different treatment options.
Great.
My name is Teddy. I'm also a first-year graduate student, and I'm interested in working with at-risk adolescent girls for internalizing disorders.
Great. And that's where we developed the intervention initially, was, or in this, the evaluation and the large-scale evaluation was with pre-adolescent girls.
Hi, I'm Michelle Before. I'm a first-year graduate student in the clinical psychology program. I'm actually being advised by both Dr. Wendy Zollerman and Dr. Jeremy
Okay.
Myers, so I'm very interested in internalizing disorders, especially the development of depression in teens for children that had anxiety at one point. So, and depression in the pubescent years. Basically, I'm here to see what kind of interventions there are for teens with or children with depression in general.
Great.
Hello.
Hi.
Sorry, Mike.
That's okay. Glad to have you.
My name is Michael Morrison. I'm actually a therapist at Care Resource here in Miami, in Midtown. We actually were just funded by the CDC to do an intervention working with youth in the centers, prevention method for HIV/AIDS. Age range is 13 to 29, so it's mostly just needs. So just catching up with some knowledge, working with the population, much more than adults, which is really nice.
Great. Glad you're here.
My name is Amy Alshler, and I'm also a first-year clinical student. I'm working with Dr. Jan Washbush, so mostly ADHD and some emotional needs. And I haven't had much experience with depressed youth, which is why I wanted to come in.
I'm Erin Henneman, also a first-year clinical student working with Wendy Silverman, so interested in learning more about the full internalizing spectrum.
I'm Chelsea Hartley. I'm also a first-year clinical student. I'm working with Dr. Jeremy Myers.
a better handle on what this cognitive restructuring stuff looks like, and talk about it, as you said, very briefly.
Yeah, and it's really, I did a year of training at the Beck Institute as a Beck Institute scholar, and so I had the opportunity to work with Judy and Aaron Beck and their staff. And it was really a great experience, but also helped me to understand how long it really takes to learn how to do cognitive therapy well. So a half day will be good, but it's going to, you'll have to take it, apply it, and get a lot of supervision.
I'm a graduate student at CCL. I've come from the University of Maine clinical program with practical and work with children with ADHD. And I'm interested in hearing French intervention for kids with ADHD. I'm interested to learn about learn more about cognitive restructuring.
Great. Hey, Tuma.
I'm Tuma. I am a graduate student here, Dr. Holmes graduate student, and I had a little bit of experience learning about individual CBT back in Buffalo, so I'm interested in learning about how group-based
Hi, my name is Carla Marin, and I am a postdoc here with Dr. Linda Silverman. She was actually my doctoral advisor, so I'm continuing on with her. So I have a lot of experience working with children who have anxiety disorders, and also some experience with depressed kids, because as you know, a lot of the kids that come into our center have comorbid depressive disorders. So I'm here because I want to know more about the cognitive restructuring part with depressed youth.
Okay, great.
My name is Jacqueline Ray. I'm also a postdoc for Dr. Wendy Silverman. I also graduated last year with my PhD in developmental psychology. She was my major professor. So I pretty much can echo everything that Carla just said, because we work practically on everything together. So I also have experience administering treatment to children with anxiety, and I'm also here to learn a little bit more about depression and cognitive restructuring aspects of it as well.
Great.
I'm Jenna Boss. I'm in my last semester of graduate school. I'm actually with the mental health counseling program, and I'm just trying to learn everything I can before I leave. So.
Okay. Good. So it's a real mix of interests and age range that you work with and disorders. So this is going to be, I think, a lot of fun to do. Goals for training. Well, I'm hoping that you're going to be able to basically understand how to apply the main treatment ingredients: affective education, coping skills, problem solving, cognitive restructuring, building positive core beliefs. One of the things that I think is an important kind of takeaway right off the bat is, if you think about all of you who work with Wendy, there's a lot of you who have this kind of expertise in the treatment of anxiety disorders. There's a lot of kind of parallel similarity between what you do for the treatment of depression and what you do for the treatment of anxiety disorders. So I would say the first kind of half of treatment is very similar, and then they branch off. And so the branching is that with anxiety disorders, you move into the exposure and response prevention. And then for depression, you move into more of the cognitive restructuring and continuing to work on the coping skills to activate the kids. But up until that point, they're very similar. And even when you think about the intervention for kids who are acting out, which a lot of you are into, you start with the psychoeducation of the kids and the parents, and then you move into some coping skills training to help them learn how to manage their anger and problem solving so they make better choices about what they do. But then you move more into the parent training component and teaching the parents how to manage the kids' behavior. So I think there's a lot of similarity across different cognitive behavioral interventions. And if you look at them for that kind of similarity, it makes designing the interventions easier because you're going to start with psychoeducation, you're going to move into skills building, and then you're going to detour depending upon the disorder. But the first, probably 6 to 8 sessions are really going to be very similar across the disorders. I hope that you're going to be able to kind of flexibly use the treatment components because the intervention manual is designed in a stepwise fashion where you do, you teach this, then you teach that, and then you teach that. But in reality, the kids bring different things, different days to the session. So you have to know the intervention well enough to use it flexibly. If you don't, it's kind of stilted and it's not going to work as well. We're going to work for a while this morning on conceptualization because that's really going to be important. And then we're going to tomorrow work on the parent training component. I borrowed a fair amount from the treatments that were designed for kids who are acting out. So those of you who work with kids who are acting out, you're going to see some of those components in this intervention package. Okay, so our agenda is going to be, we've already made it through introductions, objectives. We're going to talk about suggestions for using a manual wisely, conceptual basis of treatment, overview of treatment, structure of meetings, case conceptualization, and treatment planning. And my guess is I've already taken longer than I expected. So I don't think we'll manage to get all that done by 10:45, but certainly we'll get through all that by lunch. Why would you want to use the action treatment protocol? Well, we did a 5-year study of its effectiveness, and actually the manuscripts are about to be submitted, and the results are really impressive. So if you look at just the clinical results and you look at the percentage of kids who are no longer depressed at the end of treatment, you're going to find that in the cognitive behavioral intervention in the action treatment itself, it was 84%. In the action plus parent training, it was 81%. And that compares to the minimal contact condition where it was only 46%. Okay? So when you're thinking about these results, they're exciting because the primary study in the field up to this point in time was the TADS study. And if you're familiar with the results of TADS, at the end of the 12-week intervention, anyone remember what percentage of the kids were better? It was about 37 to 42% had improved. Okay? And that was no different than the placebo effect. And for the kids that had received fluoxetine, it was about 63% had improved at the end of 12 weeks. And then if you looked at the fluoxetine plus their CBT intervention, I think it was about 72% had improved. So when you look at our results relative to theirs, there's a pretty dramatic difference in that we're actually, at the end of 12 weeks, about double the percentage of kids have improved without medication. So I think that it can lead us to feel optimistic that the cognitive behavioral interventions can be effective with kids that are depressed. Now, the TADS study was with an older group with adolescents, and ours was with 9 to 13-year-olds. But again, I do think that if you adapt this intervention to adolescents, it's very effective. If you look at the percentage that didn't get better, you can see that it's only 16% for the CBT, 19% for CBT plus PT, and there's really no statistical difference between those two. And then it's 54% for the minimal contact control condition. Some of the other interesting results that we've found, there's a meta-message that the kids perceive that participate in parent training. And tomorrow you'll see a table that shows you the percentage of sessions that the parents actually attended of the parent training. And you can guess that it was difficult to get the parents in. And so there were, I think it was 28% of the parents never attended any of the sessions. So if you're a child and you're depressed and you're in a group and your other group members' parents attended the meetings, but yours didn't, what's the message that you take away from that?
My parents don't care about me.
Yeah. Oh, okay. I gave you the answer. My parents don't care, they don't love me, I'm not worth it. So the kids take away that message, and so it's actually kind of a negative impact of being in the parent training condition if your parents don't participate in it. There actually appears to be a dose effect. The intervention was 20 sessions long, and what we found when we looked at maintenance over 4 years of time was that if the kids attended all 20 sessions, they were more likely to maintain the improvements. And with each session that they missed, there was an increase in the return of the depressive episode. Okay? So the more sessions they attended, the better the maintenance. The fewer sessions they attended, kind of there was a drop-off in maintenance with each session that they didn't attend. Now, the really kind of interesting thing was, remember there was no difference between the CBT condition and the CBT plus parent training condition at post-treatment. And I figured that that's the way it was going to turn out. But what I was hoping, although as a scientist I shouldn't say hoping because that's slanted. So what I wanted to evaluate was whether the parent training would contribute to the maintenance of treatment effects. And what we ended up finding was that it actually did, and that it was dependent upon the number of sessions that the parents attended. So if the parents attended 7 or 8 sessions, their daughters were more likely to maintain their improvement. And it was really pretty dramatic. Those kids stayed better, and the kids in the just CBT condition were more kind of scattered in whether they stayed, their improvements were maintained or not. They looked kind of like kids who hadn't received treatment in that they were likely to remit. And then as the parents attended fewer sessions, you could see that there was less and less maintenance of treatment effects. So again, there appeared to be kind of a dosing effect for the parent training condition, and that was as the parents attended more sessions, their daughters were more likely to maintain the benefits. Another interesting thing was that participation in the parent training actually changed the family environment. And what we ended up finding was that the parents and the daughters reported that Their families were more cohesive. There was more kind of recreation and kind of social involvement of the families, and there was better communication. And then in the CBT condition, there was a slight improvement. Well, that's maybe an understatement. There's a minimal improvement. And then in the minimal contact condition, there was actually a decline in the ratings of the family. So we found an impact on the family environment. We also looked at the messages that the kids received about themselves, the world, and the future. And we found that the messages they received predicted their level of depression, but that was mediated by their own sense of self, world, and future. And what we ended up finding was that as a result of participating in the parent training sessions, the kids' sense of the messages they received became more positive, their own view of themselves became more positive, and the depression also lifted. So it seems like the parent training component had an impact on the kids cognitively, and then that contributed to the improvement. Okay, the action treatment is guided by research, both outcome studies that we've completed and other research on depressive disorders in kids. It's guided by case conceptualization, as you're going to see. We're trying to behaviorally activate the depressed kids. We're going to teach them coping and emotion regulation skills, how to solve problems. We're going to modify their dysfunctional thinking, modify some of their dysfunctional behavior, like some of the interpersonal stuff that was going on. We're going to change their environments so that we change the events that may be contributing to the depression and contributing to the negative messages that they're receiving. And we're going to teach the parents how to support their daughter's skill acquisition. Because it's one thing to get the kids to learn the skills, but it's another to get them to apply it. So we're going to teach the parents how to reinforce their kids for applying the use of the skills. And then we're going to try to teach the parents the same skills that their kids have been learning. Okay, so the therapeutic relationship is really an important part of any CBT intervention. So one of the misunderstandings about CBT is that people think of CBT and they think of it as being very procedural. Like you just teach people skills and it wouldn't matter who's doing it. You could have a computer do it and they're going to get the skills. Well, that's just not true. CBT is the therapeutic relationship is extremely important in CBT, just like it is in any other form of treatment. It's just that we view it as creating the environment that sets the stage for the kids learning the skills rather than the relationship being the primary treatment ingredient. We actually, one of the dissertations that came out of the action study went back, it was a qualitative study, and asked the participants who got better and those who didn't what they thought was most helpful. And it was really interesting. The participants would say like coping skills or problem solving or cognitive restructuring. They didn't say anything about the therapists. So one of the follow-up questions was, well, how about the therapist? And it was a group intervention, and the kids would say, she was cool, she was pretty helpful, but it was really the skills that helped them the most. And when they talked about the therapeutic relationship, it was more between the different girls in the group rather than between them and the therapist. So the relationship was important, but it was really the skills that they saw as contributing to the change. The relationship can be corrective in and of itself, in that the kids are now, like your kids who have parents who maybe have been neglectful or abusive, or just kind of rough, angry, abusing substances or whatever. The kids aren't used to a healthy individual that they can have an appropriately intimate relationship with. And when they have that with the therapist, it starts to change their sense of self. So if you think about it, if you're working with a therapist, the therapist really seems to care about you, remembers important things from meeting to meeting, and seems to be working very hard to help you get better. What's the kid's understanding going to be of that? How are they going to construct that? What meaning are they going to take from that?
That I matter.
Yeah, that I matter. And for some kids, it's the first time that they really get the sense that they matter. And so you can use that to restructure the belief that I'm worthless and to build a new belief that I matter. And you can help them to see that maybe it's because their parent had a substance abuse issue, or the parent had their own mental health issues, and that's why they acted in that way. It's not a matter of you don't matter. It's a matter of they just couldn't show you that you really do matter. And then you help them to find other evidence that they matter. Okay, so the therapeutic relationship's important, creates the environment, and it does do some cognitive restructuring. And the other part of it is that you model for the kids how they should be treated, how adults should really interact with them. They should show them respect. They should treat them in an appropriately affectionate kind of way. They should be able to talk with them and communicate and be open and things like that. And then it creates the safe environment for the kids to learn the skills and try them out. I think for those of you who work with anxiety disorders, one of the things that I've found to be most challenging with the kids who have anxiety disorders is they find coming to therapy to be anxiety provoking. So they want to avoid coming in, and they want to avoid talking about the things that make them anxious. So you have to work really hard to create an environment that's really safe for them, where they are willing to do the exposures or learn the skills or even talk about what makes them anxious. Okay, the other nice part about the therapeutic relationship is it's a snapshot of the way the kids interact with others. So I can think of one of the kids that I work with now that I really enjoy working with, but he's got a bit of an edge to him. And I'll come out to get him and to start the meeting, and let's say I'm a couple minutes late. I'm usually really good about being on time because I know it's important, but I might be a couple minutes late, and the kid will say to me, "How come you're late? You know, what's going on? What's the matter?" Like I've really screwed up, you know. And so he points out things like that. Like one day he said, "So, who dressed you? One of your kids?" And fortunately, I wasn't thrown too much by it, and I said, "Well, I don't know. I feel pretty good about the way I'm dressed right now," and went on. But he's got that edge to him. He's a lot of fun, but he's got that edge, and so other kids, I think, have found that to be a little abrasive. So you get a sense of what the kids are like. And then, you know, you get the anxious kids who they're a little anxious to start with. They make you feel a little anxious as you're working with them. And then they're often really pleasing, and they're overly pleasing. And so they're always saying, "Yes, that's it, you got it." You know, and you have to weigh whether you're really on track or not. Therapist behaviors that are important: warmth, genuineness, being real, being natural with the kids is really important. Accurate empathy is going to be crucial, I think, for the kids with internalizing disorders. It helps you kind of predict what they're thinking and how they're emoting. Have a professional manner, engaging. One of my friends was trying to use Phil Kendall's coping cat intervention, and she was using it, and she said, this stuff just doesn't work. And so I probed a little bit further, and what she was doing was just implementing it almost word for word. And you do this, then you do that, then you do that. And so needless to say, it wasn't at all engaging for the kid. And so you've really got to make it engaging, really get them involved. Otherwise, it's an academic exercise, and that's not therapy. Humor and fun. So especially with depressed kids, if you think about it, they don't have fun. They don't find things to be funny. So anything you can do to lift their mood is therapeutic. So that's an important part of the intervention. Humor, dealing with the anxious kids, takes some of their the edge off of the stuff that you're doing. You've just done a pretty intense exposure, and they're kind of on the edge of freaking out. A little humor can help take the anxiety, the upset down. Credible is really important. You've got to come across as being credible. And the way you do that is through being effective. So a lot of the kids are skeptics. They think, this isn't going to work, nothing's worked. You think of the kids that you work with and you work with in the community that have worked with countless therapists before you, and they say nothing works. I've been to see the best shrinks in town. Doesn't do any good. Well, if you don't build credibility, if you're not effective, then you're going to get blown off just like everybody else. So the way you build credibility is by being effective in session. And so we'll talk about that. Things that you can do that really demonstrate that what you're doing has an impact. It's going to work. Communicating at the child's level, that's, we're all trained to do that, trying to adjust your language for the kids that you're working with. Good mix of questions, statements, and summaries. Otherwise, CBT involves a Socratic method. That can come across as cross-examination if you're not doing it well, So you've got to mix the questions with statements, with summaries, so that it doesn't come across in that kind of interrogation fashion. And one of the things that I've really been struck by when I listened to the tapes of the therapists who did the action study was they are incredibly positive. I know we talked about it, they had a lot of training, but, and I chose really the best of our grad students to do the intervention, but boy, are they positive. They are constantly looking for anything that any of the girls do that's positive, and they tell them about it. Great job of listening, great job of supporting the other girls. Wow, that's incredible, you did your homework, so it's just one positive thing after another. And I think that was really important in the overall outcome of the study.